La mujer perfecta está aquí, la estás viendo frente a ti. Amo como soy, amo mi nariz aguileña, mi rostro redondo, mi metro 60 como soy. Y está perfecto, los estereotipos son obsoletos. Amo mis pecas, amo mi cuerpo, amo lo que ves, 90, 60, 90, amo mi pelo.
Good morning, Emerson College in Los Angeles. Good evening, Emerson College at Castelwell, the Netherlands. Also, good evening to our colleagues at the Paris College of Art. And good afternoon, Boston campus. My name is Dr. Anthony Pender, and I serve as the Vice Provost for Internationalization and Equity at Emerson College. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the 8th Annual Teaching on Race, a hybrid two-day series of programming designed to underscore the college's commitment to equity, accessibility, and social justice. We celebrate the teaching on race in February during Black History Month, which was established by the historian Carter G. Woodson in 1976, to recognize the achievements of African Americans and their central role in U.S. history. I've been known for telling our students and our colleagues that we are everywhere we have ever been. My travels have confirmed that resilience and resistance against systematic oppression is a common struggle among many racial and ethnic communities. Intersectionality allows us to look within ourselves, our communities, and across the world to better understand and dismantle the multiple racial hierarchies. And Emerson's Teach In on Race provides specific space to do just that. The programming grounded in this year's theme, A New Normal Just Won't Do, Intersectionality in the Arts and Communication, was curated and coordinated jointly by various offices across the Emerson College campus. Intersectionality as a concept was introduced to us by Kimberly Crenshaw, a scholar of law, critical race theory, and Black feminist thought. Crenshaw sought to expose exponential forms of marginalization and oppression, and how race, class, gender, and other individual characteristics intersect with one another and overlap, to demolish racial hierarchies altogether. This is demonstrated in the expansion of critical race theory to include Lat crit, Asian crit, and tribal crit. This year's teaching on race aims to dive deep into questions about structural, systematic racism, white supremacy, and oppression. While some of us experience the intersection of systematic oppression just as Crenshaw describes it, we all have a responsibility to name, notice, and dismantle any systems of structure that is inherently biased and oppressive, from Emerson LA, Castelwell, here in Boston, within our residence hall, classroom, stages, sets, and learning environments here at Emerson. I want to publicly thank our awesome colleagues who served on the Teaching and Planning Committee, and in particular, Samantha Ivory, who led us to today. The committee worked extremely hard on producing the wonderfully robust two-day program for this year's Teaching on Race. So I say again, thank you, thank you, thank you, wherever you are. And on behalf of the Teaching and Planning Committee, we have especially appreciated our collaboration with all of this year's amazing presenters, artists, panelists, and event sponsors who are graciously contributing their time and content expertise to this year's teach-in. A heartfelt thank you to each of you as well. While an event like Teaching on Race aims to be powerful and transformative, it would not be possible without the generous financial support of donors who are generally and equally committed to equity work. In this regard, I would like to take a moment to thank the various donors that specifically contribute each year to the college's Internationalization and Equity Fund. Their generous gift supports programming in the areas of internationalization and equity, and the annual Teaching on Race is one such initiative supported by this fund. We hope that after this year's teach-in, more will consider giving to the Internationalization and Equity Fund. I would now like to welcome Emerson's Vice President for Equity and Social Justice, Shea Gregory-Poku, who will offer a few brief remarks, followed by Emerson College's President, Dr. Jay Bernhardt.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening to Emersonians around the world. My name is Shea Gregory-Poku. I use she, her pronouns. For those listening online or with any visual impairments, I'm a 5'7" African-American woman with my hair in braids and a green skirt and navy blazer on. I have the distinct honor of being Emerson's Vice President for Equity and Social Justice. I want to thank my colleagues in the Office of Internationalization and Equity, the President's Office, and Academic Affairs for sponsoring the 2024 Teach-In on Race. The fact that Emerson has set aside dedicated time to reflect and learn about intersectionality is critical and deeply tethered to our values of equity, access, and social justice as a community. My role today is to offer a land acknowledgement. As I do so, I must mention that there are many sovereign nations that despise land acknowledgements or want them to end because they have become performative messages about Indigenous rights and histories without doing the work of addressing Indigenous rights and histories. Settler colonialism in the United States has never ended. The land has never been ceded. As the land acknowledgement thoughtfully developed by our colleagues in Intercultural Student Affairs states, Emerson College, Boston, resides on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Massachusetts people, whose name was appropriated by this Commonwealth. We pay respect to the Massachusetts elders, past and present. We acknowledge the truth of violence perpetuated in the name of this country and make a commitment to uncovering that truth. There are offices across Emerson doing the work of helping to name and uncover these truths. Here are a few examples. The Office of the Arts, which includes Arts Emerson and HowlRound, are convening Black and Indigenous dialogues to unearth shared stories of resistance. This past September, Arts Emerson hosted We Are the Land, where audiences heard directly from Wampanoag elders, artists, actors, and historians who told their story in a way that both honors their ancestors and looks toward the future. Additionally, the Emerson Contemporary Gallery has a new grant working with the North American Indian Center of Boston. It's a part of the Unmonumental Transform Boston Grant, which has established a curatorial cohort to put together a series of public art interventions and projects to address the memorial landscape across Boston. They are suggesting new ideas for who or what should be memorialized and how. This work is all meaningful and done in intentional and relational ways to share power. But I want to state clearly that there is more that we can do and must do as a college writ large to be attentive to the difference between dominant and counter narratives. Dominant narratives are a form of cultural violence. As one example of the harm of dominant narratives, I want to briefly deconstruct Columbus Day. Many of us who grew up in the United States learned in school about Christopher Columbus. Amid those lessons imparted to us, very few of us ever learned that Christopher Columbus never landed in the United States, ever. Columbus and his crews landed in places renamed the Bahamas, Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. What does it mean in terms of cultural violence that we know the names of Columbus's ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, but we're not taught the stories or the contributions of the indigenous Lusayan and Taino peoples that Columbus encountered? What does it mean in the name of cultural violence that we know Columbus's name, but not the names or the stories or the contributions of the Venturino, Gabrielo Tavana, and Fernando people who are the indigenous stewards and owners of the land in Los Angeles? What does it mean in terms of cultural violence that we were taught as rhymes to help us remember 1492, but we're given no to little information that Columbus's crews violently and almost sadistically enslaved, insulted indigenous people? What does it mean in the name of cultural violence that we have a holiday named after Columbus that tells this narrative, but many of us have never been taught about the 523 government-funded and often church-run Indian boarding schools across the U.S. in the 19th and 20th centuries? Efforts to simply rename Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day does not undo the harm, and it does not sufficiently challenge the dominant narratives at play. Dominant and counter narratives that I'm mentioning now are about more than misconceptions and erasure. They are about power, and they are about personhood. As creatives, we cannot humanize and honor narratives we do not know the complexity of. And we have to ask ourselves continually, how much do we know about indigenous displacement, deculturalization, genocide, and land theft? when as storytellers and scholars, as Emersonians, we do not counter harmful, dominant narratives, there will continue to be intergenerational suffering, undermining Indigenous sovereignty and selfhood. This year's theme is A New Normal Just Won't Do, intersectionally in the arts and communication. We have to do our part to carefully understand the nuances and complexity of decolonial narratives and advance them thoughtfully. A new normal just won't do. Thank you.
Good day, Emersonians. I'd like to start really by thanking Tony and thanking Shea for their insightful remarks and thought-provoking remarks that they shared. Let's give them another hand for those remarks. It's a real honor to be with you today at the 2024 Teach-In on Race, my first Teach-In on Race here since becoming president. And I really want to thank all of you who are here with us in person in Boston, those of us joining on the live stream. I also want to extend a special welcome to our campus communities in the Netherlands and to Los Angeles. Thank you for joining us. I'd also like to welcome and recognize our two special guests who are here with us today that you'll get to meet. Author and Brown University lecturer Grace Talusan, who's our keynote speaker, and filmmaker Raman Oladigbolo, whose film Soul Sisters will be screened at the Bordy Theater later today, and we hope you can join us for that. This year's teach-in would not be possible without the help and coordination of many people in offices, and I do want to take a moment to thank them by name. This, of course, includes Interim Provost Jan Roberts-Breslin in the front. Thank you, Jan. And all the members of our teach-in committee, including Tony Pinder, Samantha Ivory, Taikisha Morgan, Tuesday Roberts, Matt Finn, Pavel Zlatkin, Juanma Suarez, Tesonyere, and Eric Matthews. Let's give them all our thanks. We also want to recognize and thank the Office of Internationalization and Equity, Pierre Huberson and his team, the Emerson WLP professor, Jabari Asim, who founded the annual Teach-In in 2016. Let's thank them for their great work. So we've been doing this since 2016, and the goal and purposes of the Teach-In on Race include enhancing our community's understanding of race, particularly in the US, both historically and today, building capacity on campus for communicating about matters of race, ethnicity, and identity, enhancing a campus climate that supports students, faculty, and staff of color, and helping the Emerson community engage around issues of race and racism and generate actions that address race relations on this campus and beyond. As you heard, this year's theme is A New Normal Just Won't Do, Intersectionality, and the Arts and Communication. And it's in this meaningful context with which this dialogue is taking place. I hope that the sessions and discussions today and tomorrow will be informative, thought-provoking, and motivating for all of us who attend. Let me also say that as important as our Teach-In on Race is, we know that our commitment to equity and social justice extends beyond these 2 days. I hope that this year's Teach-In inspires you, deepens your understanding, and provides you the opportunity to learn and to grow. We do so within a community whose members appreciate, respect, learn from, and actively seek out perspectives that are different, vastly different sometimes from our own. Understanding and critically engaging with the stories of our world is at the core of who we are and what we do here at Emerson. Our annual Teach-In on Race is just one example of that commitment. So again, I thank you all for supporting the Teach-In, for participating in these critical discussions, for participating in your own self-reflection, and for the ways with which each and every one of us and you models equity practices. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Shea, not only for your remarks, but just for your support for Teach-In. Now I would like to welcome 3 exceptionally talented Emerson students. I'm so excited. Sydney Rice, class of 2024, Maddie Reyes, class of 2024, and Sky Fortes, class of 2025, who will bless us with a vocal performance. Following their performance, Writing, Literature, and Publishing Department Chair Dr. Roy Kamada will introduce our keynote speaker, the incredible author and Brown faculty member, Grace Talusan. The keynote address will be followed by a Q&A moderated by Roy. And as we embark on our 8th annual Teaching on Race, our hope is that you will be inspired to act in the service of creating a teaching and learning environment that is anti-racist, equitable, accessible, and socially just. Now, to all of our Emerson students, faculty, staff, and alumni, friends, and guests assembled here today and viewing via live stream, welcome to the 8th annual Teaching on Race. Sydney?
I guess you wonder where I've been. I searched to find a love within. And I came back to let you know, yeah, got a thing for you, and I can't let it go. Some people go around the world for Some love. People go around the world. Some people go around the world for love. Where are you willing to go? Some people go around the world for love. To find love. I searched for love, real and true. And I had so many questions, like what type of love sees all my flaws and still shows up? I fought to believe that this love could even apply to me in a heart like mine. I spent my life wondering if I had missed love or when it would leave, because for some reason I thought that it applied to everyone else but me. I fought for this love, but most importantly, love fought for me, because that is what love is. That is who love is. I am gaining the confidence to follow the still voice that tells me I am enough, or the loud voice in the wilderness that tells me to get back up. I am allowing myself to be loved, to be seen, even in the messiest of shapes. My journey hasn't always been easy. It hasn't always been comfortable, but it will always, always be worth fighting for. What you won't do for love. You tried everything, but you won't give up. In my world, only you made me do for love that I would not do, that I would not do, that I would not do, that I would not do. Yeah. Where are you willing to go? People go around the world for love. What are you willing to show? People go around the world for love. And are you ready to heal? People go around the world for love. What are you willing to know? People go yeah. Where are you willing to go? What are you willing to show? And are you ready to heal? What are you willing to know? And when it's too much to feel, and all you see are the lows, do you still kinda worth it? Yeah. Are you ready to grow? Where are you willing to go? What are you willing to show? And are you ready to heal? What are you willing to know? And when it's too much to feel, and all you see are the lows, do you still kinda worth it? Yeah. Are you ready to grow? Thank you.
Okay, that was unwise. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and let's get another round of applause for Sydney Rice, Maddie Reyes, and Sky Fortes. That was really fantastic. Thank you. It's hard to follow that. Aloha kako, aloha kakayaka, ohayo gozaimasu, mabuhay. Good morning, everybody. That was Hawaiian, Japanese, and Tagalog, because the Pacific Rim is in the house today. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker today. It's not often that you get the chance to give flowers to one of your oldest and dearest friends in front of your entire community. But that's exactly the blessing that I've received today. I have known Grace longer than I have known Emerson College, and I have been here since 2006. We were texting the other night, and we think we probably met sometime in the late 90s in a kitchen in a Buddhist temple in J-Town in San Francisco. We were both early members of the legendary San Francisco Asian American writers group, the 17 Syllables, which was named after Hisaya Yamamoto's short story written during and about Japanese internment during World War II. The story elevated the experience of an imprisoned young Japanese-American girl during what was a crime against humanity. It is a story that we wanted to draw strength from. It was a story that brought together intersecting identities and highlighted how individual experience is a unique and powerful tool and can be driven by resistance to institutional racism, embedded patriarchy, and the dominant narratives of white supremacy. When I first read Grace Talusan's book, The Body Papers, I knew that I was in the presence of another voice who would amplify and articulate the intersections of multiple forms of traditionally excluded identities, but in a way that would speak to women, Filipinas, immigrant women, women of color, and women whose bodies have borne the traces of trauma. It was a book that we all needed for ourselves, for our fathers and mothers, for our brothers and sisters, for our sons and daughters, and for all of our family members and found family who might not identify with single genders. My family has been in Hawaii since the late 19th century as colonizing settlers. We arrived when it was the Kingdom of Hawaii. We were there when the Queen was overthrown by American business and military interests. My wife's parents are from Zanzibar and originally from Goa, but they now live a few minutes away on Mass Ave. My children are born in Hawaii and have been schooled so far in Massachusetts, and we have worked so very hard to weave into their lives little gestures and practices from their multiple places of origin. They eat sashimi with chopsticks. They know how to throw a proper shaka. They know some words in Swahili, and they know that aloha means hello, goodbye, and I love you. I love Grace's book because she speaks to the yearning for a home that one might only lightly know, the estrangement of a language that might have been yours, and the sense of dislocation that befalls children of the diasporas. Those of us who have migrated, immigrated, and distended our families across oceans and continents. It is a book that sings her songs in harmony with so many others. I'm so very pleased to introduce Grace Talusan to my Emerson Ohana. Grace wrote The Body Papers, which won the Restless Book Prize for New Immigrant Writing and the Massachusetts Book Award in Nonfiction. She teaches writing at Brown University, and she was born in the Philippines, raised in New England, and currently she lives outside of Boston. Please help me to welcome Grace Talusan to Emerson College.
Thank you. Thanks. I was already kind of tearing up listening to the music. Nothing makes me happier than seeing people do what they do best. It's why I'm a teacher, I think. But Roy, I told you, I didn't want to mess my makeup up, but thank you for that introduction. And I want to thank everybody who made this day happen and who decided that you wanted to hear me speak today. I really, it means a lot to me. Okay, I know there's been a lot of thanks already, so I do want to jump in, and I'll raise my hand when I want the slides to be changed. So I want to actually go to the clip of the sound at this point. So we'll go there. That's slide number 3. Okay. And there's music playing on it, so I'd like to start there. There you go. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So what you just heard was, you could hear, if you listened for the high notes, you could hear the sound of a piccolo. And that is a recording of my great-grandfather, Captain Pedro Navarro, playing in the United States over 120 years ago. Sometimes I used to think, my life in the United States started with my parents coming here post-1965 when they availed of the opportunities that opened up after the Hart-Sellers Act, and they came here as physicians. But that's not true. My life in the United States actually began with my ancestor in 1904 when he came here as part of the St. Louis, as an exhibition of the St. Louis World's Exposition or World's Fair. And if you know about this fair, you'll know that there were people at the fair who were put on display. And my particular grandfather was kind of a argument or a persuasion of why colonialism was a good idea. He was an example of someone who was Christian, educated, and he was part of the military band. If you can go to, that's an image of him with a piccolo. I found this image. I went to St. Louis, I went to the archives, and I found an image of my great-grandfather in someone else's scrapbook. These World's Fairs were very popular, and people made scrapbooks about them, and so that's how I found this image of him. My sister, Dr. Mary Talusan Lakanlale, has written a book about this if you want to go in deeper. Next slide, please. Here's an image. It's okay. You can go to the next slide. There you go. So when I did research at the Clements Library at UMichigan, I came across this image, which is of a pamphlet that the St. Louis World's Fair gave out. And you can see, just by looking at it very quickly, the way that a Filipino person is portrayed. And in this instance, as in opposition to the argument that my grandfather is making with his body and piccolo. This is an image of someone who's being used to make the case for colonization, basically, at that time. It would be the United States' job to educate, uplift the quote-unquote little brown brothers. And that was part of the rhetoric used in this argument to colonize the Philippines. And so if we go to the next slide, we'll see an image of the entire band. My great-grandfather's there with the piccolo on the right. I know it's hard to parse, but in the very center, if you are able to see it, what you see is a man. He's Colonel Walter Loving, and he is the leader of this band. He's African-American, and he's an example of the people African-American soldiers who went to the Philippines and were originally part of the colonial project, and then some of them ended up allying with the revolutionaries and the Filipinos and staying and renouncing their allegiance to the US. Okay, so I'm gonna backtrack a little. We can go back to Actually, go to the next slide, please. What I want to show you with this next slide is, this is an image that was just taken recently of my mother and father. My mother's in the audience. And this is a project that an artist has that is trying to act against erasure. So if part of the project of this teach-in is that we're going to name and recognize things that have happened, we also want to take these other steps, which is like, what can we do with our resources, time, and talent to challenge some of these acts and things that we don't like? And so for Jana Langholtz, what she has done in St. Louis is to work against the erasure of what was there. This is where my great-grandfather was. This was where all the Filipinos were on display in St. Louis. And her project as an artist has been to commemorate that place. And recently, she's been successful. The next image is an image of Jana Langholtz. And she's been successful in getting a permanent historical marker to commemorate the Philippine village. If we go to the next slide. Okay, and so you'll see that this has become a permanent recognition. And so artists, or even if you're not an artist, there's things that you can do to try to repair, address, acknowledge, make a space for some of the erasures that have happened in our histories. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about, address some of the focus of this teach-in, which is around intersectionality. So if we can go to 2 slides forward, please. So as we heard earlier, the definition of intersectionality, here's another interview where Crenshaw is describing this. Intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It is not simply that there's a race problem here, a gender problem here, and a class or LGBTQ problem there. Many times that framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of these things. And so I'm going to give you the example of my mother-in-law, and because she was involved in a legal, if Crenshaw is working, if this term is first used as a legal term, I wanted to bring your attention to my mother-in-law, who is involved in a legal case. So we can go to the next slide. And this is an image from my husband's artwork, who's also here. His work is called Gone by the Way of Fat Sam, and part of his work as a visual artist is to, again, bring these images back to try to counteract and talk to some of the erasures. But I wanted to show it to you to give you an image of some of these people that I'm going to talk about. So next slide, please. You'll see my husband's 3rd great-grandparents, Richard and Emmeline Griffin. They were enslaved in Virginia. They self-emancipated by following the Union Army into Kentucky. And this is an image of them, which is like stunning that this exists. And so a few generations later, next slide, please, you have my mother-in-law, Marianne Nichols, and she is the child on the right of the 2 children on bicycles, and so that's when she's a child. And then you see her at high school graduation in 1964. So some of you have just graduated high school. If you recall this time period for people who graduated a long time ago, you know what an important moment this is to launch yourself off into the future. But the future that my mother-in-law was looking at, it was before the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So there's the civil rights movement is happening, of course, but there's this turn that happens in 1965. And so she graduates before that. Her younger brothers graduate afterwards. And there's ways that their lives, you can see how their lives have been very, very directly impacted by that one piece of legislation. So if we go to the next slide. So my mother-in-law she had this opportunity after post-65 to work for the phone company. She was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky during segregation. The living conditions that she lived in were directly impacted by white supremacist social codes, policies, and laws. Her father finished 6th grade. Her mother had some elementary school, and my mother-in-law, Mary Ann, was the first person in her family to graduate with a high school diploma. Because she was afforded some early opportunities post-65, she was able to get a job at the telephone company. I know people don't even know what phone companies are in the same ways. It was a utility, very important. But this afforded my mother-in-law a stability that generations of her family had not previously accessed. It was a union job with steady pay and raises, health insurance. My mother-in-law did not have to work outside in the sun or inside someone else's home. She stayed at that phone company for almost 30 years. And when she became a single mother of 3 children, she also took on the care of her elderly parents, she stretched that paycheck as far as she could take it. And yet, a few decades into her work, she finds out that a Black man in Alabama has sued Bell South for racial discrimination, and he wins the lawsuit. And she joins that class action lawsuit and discovers that she's been underpaid by 2 pay grades for over a decade. They paid her a little bit as part of the settlement, but once she'd paid her taxes and everything, it really was not significant amount of money. I just asked my husband recently how that wage theft impacted his life, and it was huge. I mean, there's ways that I could talk the rest of the time just on those ways. But for example, our ability to buy a home. We just bought one a couple of years ago. We'd spent about 20 years saving money to do that. And so here is where you can see how intersectionality has impacted my mother-in-law's life and how multiple systems of oppression, anti-Black racism, misogyny, poverty, pressed on her life, and then her son's life, my husband, and it's part of my life. As an Asian American immigrant, I did not understand at first how I was being used when I first heard the term model minority. We can go to the slides forward. This is images of the lawsuit, sorry. We can keep going forward, more images. My mother-in-law sent me some of her paperwork. It's a habit I have as well. It's like, I can't just tell a story, I have to have like quote unquote receipts or archives. So that's what that is. Those are the receipts. She was part of that lawsuit. So this is a recent photo of my mother and my mother-in-law in my mother-in-law's home. She's very proud of her home. She bought it and is still in it, and we're gonna keep it in the family. Okay, next slide, please. And you can keep going. Okay, so this magazine cover, some of you may know it, some of you may not. It's from 1987, Time magazine, and the cover says, "Those Asian American whiz kids." At the time, people got these things called magazines. They're made of paper. They came into doctors' offices and people's homes. People read them. And Time magazine was quite ubiquitous. Like anywhere you go, like waiting room, it could be a doctor's office, it could be at the mechanics. Like you'll see a Time magazine in schools. So when I say that's ubiquitous, like you'll find this piece of paper, this cover, lots and lots of places. So this image of this Asian American whiz kids is replicated. This idea and this notion of Asian Americans as being some sort of special kind of essential minority is built, right? So if we think that there's a model minority, okay, well then who is constructed as the problem minority? And it took me a long time to understand how I was being used in that instance as a wedge, as a way to be divisive, really, and to like keep me apart from other people who struggled with very similar oppressions. And so I began to think about and ask who and what systems benefit from this divisiveness. I remember being in high school studying for my AP history and other AP exams, feeling like, oh good, like I'm thinking about like, I'm smart, like people have said that I'm smart, so I must be smart. If you look at my scores, like not necessarily, but that's a whole other conversation. But still, there's this way that, I was guilty of taking this stereotype and kind of using it to prop up my own internal racism. Meanwhile, my husband is also in high school with a mother who's grossly underpaid and yet still feeding and sheltering her extended family. And he did not have the money to pay that fee. To me, I think of like that fee to pay the AP. It's really not that much. But for him, it was quite a struggle, and he had to figure out a way that he was going to take the AP exam. He didn't have that money. I did not understand his experience, and I didn't understand what I might be able to do until more recently as a storyteller and a teacher and a writer with this particular perspective that I have, what I call a front row seat to anti-Black racism. We've been together for almost 30 years at this point, and yet I'm still actually stunned and surprised by how differently we experience life based on these social identities. It's not easy to contend with. There's all kinds of feelings that I have about it, but I think it's an important experience to grapple with wherever we are. I think that it's one way to do some of this work that we talk about in terms of like what are our responsibilities as people to each other. And so I'm going to read from an example of how what I did with this grappling. I recently published an essay, and we can go forward for a couple of, that's me, my all-American, quote unquote, childhood playing three-legged race, I think it is. Yeah. Okay, we can go forward. Okay, so I'll stop here. This is a piece, I'm reading from a piece where I'm thinking very directly about my role as an Asian American in this work of trying to counteract, where I can, anti-Black racism. The summer before I published my first and so far only book, my husband and I finally saved enough money and time to spend a week in Paris. It was 2018, and we were celebrating our 7th wedding anniversary, which felt significant. I had not returned to Paris since the summer before graduate school, just weeks before I met Alonzo. A turning point so many decades ago. As we dreamed of our future, Alonzo and I imagined traveling to Paris together someday. With another turning point ahead, publishing my book, it was time. I enticed Alonzo with descriptions of the delicious yogurt, pastries, and hot chocolate that did not taste the same anywhere else in the world, and the best places to view Paris at different angles and times of day. Not that he needed much convincing. Alonzo had always been interested in France, especially Paris, as it was a mythical place in his imagination, an historically renowned refuge for African American artists and writers. Together, we said aloud the names of the Harlem Renaissance writers we had read: Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, Nella Larson, Richard Wright, Dorothy West. Over many years, whenever we fantasized about traveling to Paris, my husband would wonder aloud if this could be true. Was there a place in this world where the weight of white supremacy felt lighter? Alonzo and I grew up in different worlds, me in New England, an immigrant from the Philippines, he in the South, a Black American. And yet we are so alike. We are both raised Catholic within a close-knit, multi-generational family. We've both experienced racism then and now, but it was not until later in life that I realized how much of our perceived identities shaped these experiences. So much of me wanted to believe that we were the same and that we could be understood through the sheer force of love. Growing up, we spent our free time reading in the public library, and this love of books brought our lives together one sunny afternoon on a college campus in Southern California. We were the first to arrive at this reception for graduate students of color on full fellowships. Our funding meant to encourage diversity in the academy. We were both far from home, and in our early 20s, our cheeks flushed in the late summer heat. We shook with the nervous energy of two people who believed that their real lives were about to begin. I was drawn in by Alonzo's Southern accent and physical presence, attracted to his warmth and kindness. Together now, for half our lives as husband and wife, we are so intertwined that I sometimes forget that we are not exactly the same. People are generally happy to see me, especially if I am smiling, which I have learned to do a lot and very pleasantly as a kind of grease for the wheels of my life. The worst things that have happened to me in interpersonal encounters are the occasional insulting ideas about Asian women's subservience or the short-sighted assumption that my English is very good for an Oriental. Conversely, besides the sociological consequences of structural racism, almost every aspect of my husband's life is haunted by anti-Blackness. Since he has encountered white people, their racist insults have wormed their way into his ears and shaped his thoughts. And from the time he entered school, his body had begun to absorb the countless slaps, punches, and kicks of white supremacy. Shortly after we moved to Boston, he was attacked by a group of young men while he walked to an evening meeting. They kicked him so furiously that his head swelled, misshapen and monstrous. At the hospital, I did not recognize the man I slept beside every night. If you're wondering if this was just a random act of violence, wrong place, wrong time, while they beat my husband, his assailants also used that word, the one that I'm told is an important word that new immigrants to America learn, along with racist jokes, so that they can learn what they shouldn't be. When I encountered my husband's bloody and bruised body against the white hospital sheets, I thought, here is the word made flesh. I was devastated to learn not long after that my husband's projected life expectancy is a good 10 years shorter than mine. Thank you. Alonzo once told me that when he was a boy, before he left the house to play with friends, his grandmother would ask if he had a dime, later upgraded to $1, in his pocket. Granny told him that this was to, quote, keep the haints off you. When I asked what a haint was, Alonzo explained to me that haints are part of Black American folklore, a version of haunt in African American vernacular English, used to describe a ghost or spirit. But as he understood it growing up in the South, they use haint to specifically reference being haunted by the police. If you didn't have any money on you, you could be picked up by the police for loitering, an easy crime to be guilty of. And before he stepped out the door, Alonzo's mother could not stop telling herself from telling him for the umpteenth time that he couldn't act out in public the way his little friends did. He could not get away with things the way white boys could. You're not white, she would remind him, as if he could ever forget. By the time Alonzo was in middle school, his grandfather knew that he was dying of cancer, but he still had enough energy in the afternoons to pull a discarded mattress from the shed and hold court from a prone position in the center of the floor. He told stories about his life, which made my husband want to see the world, including Paris. Despite the horrors he experienced in World War II, his grandfather had wonderful memories of being in France and serving in the US Army, which brought him outside the prison walls of the Jim Crow South for the first and last time in his life. After his military service, his grandfather would never leave the US again. I don't think he even left Louisville. In one of his stories, Alonzo's grandfather recounted how one day in the mountains of France, at a pit stop, he heard his name being called out, Bill Wright, in a cadence that only someone from back home could affect. Standing there an ocean away from Smoketown was his cousin, an apparition, a reminder of his past life, an undeniable proof that wonderful magical moments happened in this world. French women were very beautiful, his grandfather made sure to mention on more than one occasion. And the villagers were polite, even when they were asking very nicely to see his tail. His grandfather had initially been confused by this request. Why did the French villagers believe that he had a tail? He soon learned that the white GIs encouraged the white villagers, who had never encountered Black Americans before, to ask the Black troops to pull down their trousers so that they could prove that they were part monkey. What a prank. If curiosity about Paris as a respite for African Americans was the reason my husband wanted to travel there, I wanted to return to that city because it was there many years ago that I had conjured him in the first place, describing him in my notebook even though we hadn't met. I made a list of what I wanted in the man I would marry. Even then, I sensed I was describing an impossibility. And yet, 2 months later, there he is. Alonzo appears in front of me, moving in and out of a yellow beam of sunlight that was getting in his eyes. Alonzo's presence as a Black man changes any space he steps into. If he has spent his life being haunted by racist ideas and expectations, he has also simultaneously embodied the apparition. He's told me how much he notices, even if he pretends not to see. It does not benefit him to openly react to white people's reactions to him. He sees when they clutch their purse. He sees them crossing the street to avoid him. He sees their faces when an elevator door opens and they are startled and unhappy to find him standing there. He complains that when he stops his car in a busy area in the city, he has to shoo white people away because they pull on his car door handles, trying to get in, assuming he's their rideshare driver. He wants us to get a dog as soon as we're able, because he says that when he's walking a dog, people smile at him. They greet him instead of pretending he's not there. They're not so afraid. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Even with my spot in the passenger seat of anti-Black racism, there is a distance I can't bridge. I can shake my head and tell him, I'm sorry, and what do you need? But this is practically nothing against the constant and mundane humiliations, the danger of his very existence. Several years after our trip to Paris, back home in Boston, my husband was crossing a city street during his evening commute, and as he was almost across the last white lines of the crosswalk, a driver lowered his window to shout insults and expletives at him. The driver then sped away, leaving my husband startled and furious. Alonzo went through the checklist in his mind of what he could have done to inspire such a reaction. He had crossed a public street at the appropriate time in the appropriate place. The man is yelling at me behind the wheel of a 2-ton weapon, my husband told me later that evening, and I have nothing, no protection. In moments like these, there's only one way to respond. He quickly stepped onto the sidewalk in the building where his meeting was about to start. His life in public spaces is, and always has been, an exercise in restraint, which removes him from the immediacy of a potentially deadly situation, but not without injury. When my husband returned to me that evening, he was carrying that rage that the driver had dumped onto him, and he dropped that rage like a heavy bag onto the bamboo floors of our home. He recounted what happened as I desperately tried to think of solutions. There were none. When I show Alonzo what I've written about his experience later on, repeating back my notes from when I interviewed him and reading aloud what I thought I heard him say, he shakes his head, no. Another communication gap, this distance between fantasy and reality, between romance and a long marriage, that seems impossible to close. In Boston, he said, there's a particular kind of hostility and aggression that I experience in public spaces that you and some people just don't get. I didn't feel this when we lived in LA. It's more complicated for me than for you to just go about my business. Sometimes it's easier for me to just stay home, he said. As difficult as it is to admit how right he is, a few days after that incident in the street, while my husband was at work, I took over hosting duties for our visitor from Australia, my husband's cousin, who is perceived as white. We spent an October day together in Salem, Massachusetts, which was surprisingly crowded with costumed tourists on a weekday. As we read the gravestones of those accused of and executed for witchcraft, I thought about how over 300 years ago, these people were killed because of a story about who they were. And at the same time, I also noticed how relaxed I was. With this, quote, white man at my side, I wasn't worried that a moment with the wrong person could turn the day ugly. I watched how strangers gave my husband's fair-skinned cousin grace again and again, how easily and unguarded he walked in public space. He and my husband are blood relatives, but their lives are substantively, heartbreakingly different. He enjoys a freedom my husband could never has. If you go forward a little bit, there's a picture of my husband and that cousin. Here he is. This is the cousin. Alonzo can tell that story himself, but they share a relative who crossed the sea and to Australia and also crossed the color line at the same time. So Adam has been raised as a white man. My husband must have been tired and not up for a conversation about pop culture when we were in Paris, because as I was talking to him, he reacted in a way that I've come to recognize after many years of being together. It's a way that you keep peace. It works sometimes to pretend things are better than they actually are, but it didn't escape my notice how our decades-long conversation about how the role of racism in our lives had recently seemed to arc downward more and more towards despair. My husband rubbed his lower back. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Are you in pain?" It's true that our hotel bed in Paris was not as comfortable as our bed back home. And it was also true that we'd been walking a lot in the city. I don't think my husband noticed, but as he reassured me, he patted his pocket as if to feel for a dime or a dollar before moving his hand to where his back ached, touching the exact place on his body where those villagers expected his tail to be. I don't want to tell you this part of the story, but because we've come this far together, I will. I was walking home on an August night some weeks after our trip to Paris. It was close to 10 p.m. after teaching my summer class. Because the campus was empty and dark, I had called my husband and asked him to keep me company while I walked toward home. But as I neared our building, I spotted suspicious movement up ahead and said, "Hold on, I see someone moving behind the dumpsters. It's a man." My heart began to race and my breathing quickened my anxiety response. The man wasn't white, I noticed, but did that matter? Wasn't I just reacting to seeing a strange man at night in a place I didn't expect to see one? Wasn't I simply exhibiting the proper response to my own past lived traumas and exhibiting the appropriate amount of fear that a woman alone in public late at night should have? My thoughts began to fire rapidly as I realized the man was standing exactly between me and the entrance to my home, between danger and safety. I knew my husband could hear my breathing through the phone, and then in a moment of recognition and protectiveness, he said, "Just stay where you are and stand in a streetlight. I'll find you." So I did as I was told and waited guardedly by the nearest streetlight. I watched the man at the dumpster come directly toward me. I was shaking, but as soon as I recognized my husband's face in the light, his phone in hand, I smiled at him, blinked back my tears, and mustered a cheerful smile. Thank you. So this is from some of the work that I try to do as a writer with the material and the experiences that I have. I only have a couple of minutes, but I am a person who is familiar with experiences of dehumanization in various ways. I'm a person who's almost lost everything, which is to say, at certain points in my life, the dehumanization I experienced had the effect on me as feeling as if I should not exist, as if my voice should not make a sound. I should be silent. Everything that I suffered, I was taught, explicitly and implicitly, could be saved like a coin in my savings account that would get me my reward in heaven. So I was very much taught to be quiet and just live with it and kind of suffer and not speak up. And so if this is a teach-in about the new normal won't do, this for me, standing in front of you, talking about these very intimate things that I can only really write. Like, it's not like I have conversations about these topics all the time. It is through the act of writing that I'm able to express and explore them. That is going against that kind of force that would ask some of us to be quiet and just get along and, try to keep the peace, whatever that is. And so it's been really important to me in my work as a writer and a teacher. This is work that is my attempt to reclaim power through narrative and to also, as a teacher, encourage others who've been marginalized to use their voice in the ways they can. And this happens when we pay attention, when we read closely and think critically, when we ask questions, when we express the truth. These are practices that can promote and uphold democracy, liberating people from oppression, which is why these are also dangerous activities. There's ways that it is not so safe to express yourself in writing in the Philippines, this country my parents left in order to raise their children in the US. Telling a story could land you in prison or worse. If you see what happened during the Duterte administration and the ways that people were targeted and how many people were killed in extrajudicial killings, you'll see that. Even though it was challenging and sometimes painful to grow up as a brown, undocumented immigrant girl in America, I claim this country as the only place that I want to create a home. I still want to be here with you all, writing, teaching, participating in a literary community, and a life centered around books and stories. And for me, this is a kind of home. I've worked hard to counter messages that I internalized that made it nearly impossible for me to write and communicate. I almost silenced myself, but through active engagement and silence, I learned to listen to my voice and share my stories. The act of doing it has changed my life. And I'll leave you with this homework assignment since I'm a teacher, but it's to think about how you might challenge yourself in even the smallest way today. What is something that you might do or say that is hard for you, that is like just at the edge of what you think is comfortable? Maybe you need to forgive somebody. Maybe you need to take ownership of something. Maybe you need to tell someone you love them. But that is how I want to leave you today, is with that thought of to say something that you weren't able to say before, and to think of all of us encouraging you and supporting you to do that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh my goodness, thank you.
Right. Can everyone hear? Okay. Well, thank you, Grace, very much for that talk. And I guess, you know, I had my notes, but there's something that you said towards the end there, and it'll maybe move us into some discussions about your book a little bit. But I wanted to start with the idea of home. Mm-hmm. You know, that it is, I think for immigrants, it's a complex idea, both thinking about the place that you've come from and thinking about the work that you do in the new place to try and establish yourself, to try and, you know, make yourself belong. I was wondering if you could talk about the act of writing as a way of constituting that home.
Thank you, Roy. Can folks hear me? Is this working? Okay. I mean, that is exactly the place where that is home for me, is in the act of writing and being in relationship to my own voice and with myself. That's where home is. And there's freedom in knowing that, because I could be anywhere and do that and find home. And, you know, for a long time, I really searched for home. I grew up here in New England, and I went to the Philippines for the first time, and I thought, oh, that's where home is. And I got there, and I was like, oh, wow, so many Filipinos. I always pay attention to, like, are they Filipinos, and I try to introduce myself to them. That wasn't gonna happen when I landed at, like, a Keynote airport, okay? No, but it was stunning. I was like, wow. And yet, I spent time there, and I realized I have never felt more American in my life than when I'm in the Philippines. So that is actually not my home. And so then there's other like not just land and places, but there's times when I haven't felt at home in myself. Like when I went to college, for example, it was quite a disruptive time in my life, and I was like, couldn't settle. and couldn't figure out where home was, but writing was that place. And also friendship is that place too, where no matter where your friends are, and we've learned this from using our devices and other things, that we could actually be with our friends in all kinds of ways and to feel that sense of belonging and home. And I think it's very important as a human experience. I think I've had experiences where I have not felt as if I belonged, if I felt outside of humans. I mean, that's part of the, if you read my book, you can read more about it, but like this is part of what happens when you are assaulted, is this experience of being separated from other people. And that's a lot of my experience. And so being able to find home in writing and in friendships and in relationships has been amazing.
Thank you for that. You know, in the first chapter of your book, I love the metaphor that you explore of yogurt as being this symbol of growth and abundance, and it seems to be present in the metaphor for your experience that you're opening the book with. And I wonder, is the way that you're using yogurt and the making of yogurt and how it's something that grows out of itself, is that aspirational, or is it something is the metaphor more complex?
I mean, this is as a writing teacher, this is the kind of advice I give to students, is like, trust yourself and trust the image and trust the metaphor. So I really was just writing about yogurt. Honestly, I was writing a recipe, like, this is how you make yogurt. I love making yogurt. It was making me so happy to make yogurt because every day it was different. I was like, oh, what's gonna happen if I do this and this? Like, it was exciting to see that sort of change happen. Maybe this is why people who are parents, like, there's a joy, right, in seeing someone change. And so I was watching milk change, but still, I don't know, that was really, it was that. I just started with describing this thing closely. And of course, later in the editing process, I started to see, yes, there is something here that I'm trying to get at as a writer.
Right.
But starting the other way of like, with the theme, I think would not work.
Right. I can see how it's built out of that metaphor, and that your placement for it in the book becomes this way of speaking how you are building yourself in the book.
So that was not my choice. Like, I mean, it is my choice what to put in the book, but like, I had started somewhere else. I started chronologically, because I had heard that's the way you should do things, is be chronological. And this is where friendship comes in. A very good friend in my writing group suggested that yogurt, which was at the end of the book, because chronologically it's at the end, that I should move it to the beginning. I mean, yeah, so like she helped me. So there's work that I can do, and I can get myself to a certain place, and then I rely on community and people who can help me, and editors and friends, to help me the rest of the way, because I didn't see that as the opening at first. It took grappling with the material to get there.
You discuss moments of deep family trauma in the book, moments that I'm sure were incredibly difficult to recall, much less write, and then subsequently edit. Could you speak a little bit about the creative challenges that this presented for you?
Yeah, students do ask me about, how do I write about something difficult? It's sort of like a contradiction. Like, I actually can't talk about it. It's hard to, like, this experience that I had was difficult to put into words, even though I've done lots of therapy and talking about it. But it's hard to actually talk about it. But I can try to write. Like, for me, that's an expression that works. For you, your expression of trauma may come through other modes. It might be dance or painting. But for me, it worked. And so I was grateful to be able to write about it. It was also very hard, and I had to scaffold in treats. Like, sometimes I would cry as I was writing, because it was very painful to like be in those moments. But I told myself, like, okay, if you just get to the end of this paragraph, you can go get a lavender biscuit from that bakery down the street. If you finish before 3, like, they're gonna close at 3, so if you finish before 3, you can actually make it and get that lavender biscuit. So there's things like that. I mean, I don't know, that's too simplistic, but I think we have to know ourselves and see what we need and like, okay, so we're not like somebody else that we imagine can do everything perfectly and doesn't need any breaks or biscuits. But like, find out who you are. Like, what do you need to make your work? My hope as a teacher and a writer is that people continue to make work as long as they want. And so how can you support that in yourself? And yes, it was very hard. And I thought there would be fallout from my family, not my immediate family, the extended family, but luckily my parents took a very active role in interference. Like if people were sort of complaining or angry at me for writing about our family, my parents took a role to step in and just not let anyone get to me, basically, which is important.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It speaks to the tremendous importance of having a community around you.
Yes. You know, people make mistakes. We all do things that we wish we could change. And I have learned from my parents that you can come back. Like there are things that you can do to try to repair relationships. I don't know if the word reparations is correct, but there's ways to try to rebuild. You don't have to be gone and done forever. There are things that people can engage in as a process. And my parents ran that interference. They also almost go to every single event that I do. Like, they help me in lots of ways. I'm very spoiled, actually. Like, they're laughing because, yes, I am. They help me. And so I appreciate it because there's a lot of things to remember, so they help me. Yeah.
I just saw your sister saying.
Yes, and my sister.
You know, there's a fluidity that sort of permeates the book, and there's a movement that permeates the book, and even the specific family history that you're moving, even once you've moved to the U.S., even once you've made that big significant journey, the journeys are almost endless over the course of the book, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that kind of migration that happens after the big migration, but that series of constant movements. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you saw it being connected to not only class, but also your status as a documented or undocumented person as that changed over the course of the book.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I recently just got back from the Philippines a couple of weeks ago. I'm finally able to be in this time zone. It's a 12-hour time difference. It's quite severe. But I thought a lot about movement. There are ways that because of economics, visa, and other issues, my relatives cannot move about in the world as freely as I can with my US passport and my money too. There's that as well. There's this freedom of movement, and I'm glad that I have that freedom, and I want to exercise it and use it as much as possible because it enriches my life. But I'm also, had the experience until I was, I think, 22. Until after I graduated college, I was not a US citizen. And there was most of my growing up where I was undocumented, which means I couldn't move, throughout. I couldn't move freely. There was a certain point where I became aware of my status and was afraid that I would be deported. It's in the book, but there is paperwork from when I was 8 years old of deportation paperwork. The INS, immigration, was aware of my family. It's called being undocumented, but there is documentation, of that they were going to deport us. There's, some administrator, it was a kindness, an act of administrative kindness, that someone underlined the word 8-year-old girl a lot in my paperwork, and I'm here. They didn't come for us. I have met people in the Philippines who were not as lucky as I was, and they were deported and have spent the rest of their lives there. I love the Philippines. As I said, I just got back there, but this is my home. This is where I consider home, and I want to stay here. And so, space and moving around in space, as well as temporal kind of movement, I think about a lot because, I went back in time to come here. Like I traveled back in time 12 hours when I traveled to return. And I just think about that, like, oh, my cousins, they're like in tomorrow. What does that mean? You know, I don't know. So
in the book, there's the deportable alien
Yeah.
essay, and there's that form that you reproduce in there that classifies you as deportable,
Yeah.
that you are able to be deported. And it just struck me as such a liminal status to be in, that it's this cold and calculating word, but it has this violence behind it, that
Yes.
you can be torn from your school, from your neighborhood, from your dentist and your pediatrician and, you know, everything that you've made around you. And it's that threat of just by a check of a box.
Yes. Yes, and so perhaps that administrator who underlined 8-year-old girl was this kind of resistance, like this small act of resistance against that term deportable alien, right, in that same document. And so maybe there's ways we think like, oh, we're so powerless, we can't do much. Like, no, I don't know who that person is because they redacted their name, but like that person changed my life, you know, and I don't know who they are. But I think this, to me at least, I think this happens, I'm aware that this has happened to me several times, where there are people who've made such a difference in my life and really changed it, and I don't even know their name. I mean, I'm not going to tell the whole story now, but my husband and I were almost drowned in the Saco River in Maine, and these 3 white men with crew cuts who were flying Confederate flags, by the way, saved us, physically saved us. And if you know anything about swimming, you know that that is one of the most dangerous positions that you could put yourself in, is to rescue someone. And those men did that. And I still grapple with that. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know who they are. I was in such shock that I just said thank you to them, and that's it. That was not enough for the moment, but, you know, that's what happened.
It's a sense that there are angels everywhere, perhaps.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to make sure that I left a little bit of time for any questions from the audience. Yeah.
How have you navigated those conversations? Because I do think that a lot of my colleagues, you know, we grapple with that all the time. Like, what do I say? How do I say it? You know, I want to have this dialogue with my students, but I'm not sure on where to start, or I don't want to, you know, put any sort of preconceived notions of what the emotional roller coaster will be like. So I'm curious, how do you do it in your classroom, particularly with nonfiction work? Because I do think there's a difference in an emotional connection when you know that something actually happened versus something that was dramatized or, you know, considered fantasy.
Definitely. Thank you so much for your question as a fellow teacher. So one of the experiences that no matter who my student population is, even if they're elderly or young people, a common experience that many writing students, if not most, have had is a feeling of not being confident, of having some kind of editor or critic or even teacher in their head that has said something to hurt them that makes it difficult for them to write. And so first and foremost, no matter who my students are, is I want them to get back that power and to feel what it's like to write in their voice and to write in a way that's fun. Like I just taught yesterday, and I was so happy that the reaction that my students had, because they're having fun. Like, writing doesn't always have to be this serious, painful, there's the cliche about like open up a vein and bleed thing, right? No, it can actually be joyful. You can live your life twice, like even the fun parts. And I want to start with them there so that they have positive experiences. And then we build from there in terms of building safety, building community with each other, with me, and with themselves. And then they should go where they want to go as writers. Some of the other choices I make as a professor is my reading list. I don't say anything about it, but like Intro to Creative Nonfiction, I don't know that I teach any white male writers, like maybe one essay out of probably dozens and dozens. And I don't say anything about it, but I show my students the model texts that have meant something to me, and they're going to be writers of color or marginalized in some other way. And so that's a way that, like, quietly I've done it. No one's asked me about it and challenged my reading list, but that's what I feel I can do in making that list. And then there's courses I teach that are centered around Asian American identity, but that's different. I mean, like Intro to Creative Nonfiction. That's what the list looks like. But I do think that through practice and in community and encouragement, we can start to get our voice back. And that written voice, nonfiction especially, it's so powerful. You can do so many things with it. You can apply for grants, you can complain, you can write a policy or law, you can write an essay, but there's a lot of things you can do with that voice. And so I feel like it's a mission for me to help people strengthen that, no matter what sort of positive change they want to make. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
We have time maybe for one more question. Yeah, in the back. I think a mic is coming to you.
Hi. First of all, I also want to say that I was very moved by your talk just now, and thank you so much. I guess also something you said earlier about challenging yourself every day, like a little bit. I guess I was really curious as to what examples of challenging yourself every day are, or if there's anything that you do personally on the daily basis, because of course, obviously you came here and that was very brave of you to speak up as well. But yeah, I guess if there's like any examples that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Something that I do that has profoundly changed my life is I write every day with my friend Calvin Hennick on Zoom. We've done it since, I don't know, I can't remember when we started, but we met every single day on Zoom from 7 to 8:30 for 265 days, because we said, we want to write, and we keep, time keeps passing and we're not writing. We keep doing, all the other things that one needs to do, right, in life. But we did it. We made this commitment to each other and ourselves and our writing. And it's been some years now. I'm starting to publish from that work. Like what you heard today was part of that. But that is this way every single day that I challenge the part of me that feels small and invisible and that I should just shut up and stop talking, every single day. And it also is a vote for, I call it paying yourself first. So if there's anything that you want to do in the world that makes you happy, you should do that first, right? Why wait? Why wait till next week or summer vacation or the end of your life? Why don't you try to do a little bit of it today? If it makes you super happy to look at the sun rise, go do that. Look at birds. I don't know, do anything. It doesn't have to cost you money. I do think there's I teach a class right now at Brown called Writing Wonder, Joy, and Awe. I'm not saying that we should ignore all the horrific things that are happening every minute, but I do think that it can be a radical act for us to pay attention to beauty in the world. Just the littlest bit. It doesn't cost us anything. Let's try to it's our only life, right? So let's try to enjoy it. We don't have to wait. And we don't have to wait for someone else. I used to think oh, my life will start after I publish a book. Wow, it took me a super long time. I was late in life when I published that book. I would never encourage the young people in my life to wait for so long for anything. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Grace.
Oh, thanks.
And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do better than that. Y'all can do better than that. Yes. Wonderful. Grace, thank you so much. Thank you. You've really, really blessed us. Roy, I'm so glad that glad we had this time for friends to come together. This is wonderful. If you want to see Grace again, tomorrow, she will actually be doing a workshop for us, and I'm going to give you that information. It's tomorrow morning at 9:30, from 9:30 to 11 in the Walker Building in room 417. The title of that lecture are These Are the Days of My Life, a creative writing workshop. Have you always wanted to write? We all have stories to tell, so we're going to join Grace tomorrow for a fun, low-stakes, generative creative writing workshop with writing exercises that she uses to write her award-winning memoir, The Body Papers. We will write about our lives, our levels, all levels of experience are welcome. If you've always wanted to write a story from your life, here's your chance to give it a try. Right? So that's tomorrow morning at 9:30. And while I have your attention, if you've been moved, today at 5, our Dean's Fellows for Racial Equity and Leadership Development are putting on their own workshop this afternoon. I believe it's at 4 o'clock. And the title of their workshop is a hot dog a sandwich? It's a Jubilee-style discussion on race, how to discuss it and not argue. And so you come meet with student leaders and learn how to engage in dialogue across a variety of topics, as simple as what is a sandwich, to more difficult conversations about race, racism, and the various impacts within our learning community. At 6, we will have the amazing film screened with a talk back from the screenwriter Rahman, In America, the story of Soul Sisters. And then tomorrow we have a couple other things that we're doing. There is a QR code, I believe, on some of the flyers around, so you can get this specifically, and there have been emails all around. But there are also another faculty-focused Considering Identity and Effective Course Cultivation, a dialogue with faculty and students. That is also sponsored by our Dean's Fellowship. And then tomorrow morning, our very own Manisha Gelman will do a program based on her new book, Unlocking Learning, Education in Prison, with Manisha Gilman. That's in the Little Building tomorrow here at 9:30 in the morning from 9:30 to 10:30. Again, let's give our guests, Grace, a hand, and Roy, our colleague. And give yourselves a hand. You've been wonderful. Thank you. And for those on the live stream, thank you so much for tuning in with us. Thank you so much and have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Tomorrow, at the hands of the policeman. Ooh, and the papers say we're gonna call it a suicide. Would you even question why? Would you shake your head, say this ain't right?